Um, Before you say anything, let me finish the thought I started weeks ago, because it just came true in front of everyone, and almost nobody wants to say it outright. I said this war would not stay contained between Iran and Israel. I said the moment Washington put its own uniforms, its own carriers, and its own bases into that equation, this stopped being somebody else's regional fight and became ours, fully ours, with all the costs that come attached to that word. And now look at what is sitting on the table in front of us tonight. 7 straight nights of American strikes on Iranian soil. 6 countries hit back in a single rotation: Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Qatar, Oman, and Syria, all absorbing fire in the same short window, all because 2 capitals decided months ago that this was still a manageable little regional dispute they could contain entirely on their own terms. It is not regional anymore. I do not think it has been regional for weeks, honestly, and I think a lot of very smart people inside Washington knew that the moment the first American carrier group got repositioned into the Gulf. What you are watching right now tonight is the exact shape of the thing several of us warned about back when everyone else was still calling this a 2-week operation that would wrap up fast. I am not saying that to score a point against anyone. I am saying it because the shape of a war tells you everything about where it is headed next. And the shape of this one has just changed in a way that should worry every single person watching, not because of what it means for Iran's regime, but because of what it means for the people standing right next to Iran on the map, the ones who never asked to be part of this in the first place. So let's actually walk through what changed here carefully, because the details matter more than the headlines are giving them credit for. And most of the coverage you have seen this week has buried the parts that actually explain where this is heading. I want to be honest with you about something before I go further, because I think it matters for how you weigh everything I am about to tell you. I am not against American strength. I spent my career in uniform, and I believe in using force when it genuinely serves this country's interests. What I do not believe in, what I have never believed in, is drifting into a widening war without anyone in Washington being straight with the public about what winning actually looks like or what it costs to get there. And that is exactly what has happened here. Nobody sat the American people down and explained that degrading Iranian capability would take this many consecutive nights and counting. Nobody explained that 6 additional countries would end up absorbing fire as a direct consequence of that campaign. These things were not disclosed up front because I do not think anyone fully understood or wanted to understand how quickly this could spread once it started. Here is what nobody in that press room bothered to draw you a map of, so let me do it properly, ring by ring, because geography explains this war better than any press briefing I have sat through in months. Start at the center. Iran, 7 nights running now, and CENTCOM's own language describes the strikes as an effort to further degrade Iranian military capability. I want you to actually sit with that phrase for a second instead of letting it wash past you the way it washes past most people, because it has now been repeated almost word for word over and over for a full week straight. When a military keeps reaching for the exact same justification on the latest night that it used on the first, that usually tells you something important about how much capability was genuinely sitting there to degrade in the first place, because if the target set had actually been as decisive as advertised at the start, you would not need this stretch of nights on the same operation just to keep making the same claim. Move one ring outward, and you land in the Strait of Hormuz, where 3 commercial vessels were struck this week alone, including a Qatari liquefied natural gas carrier that had to send out a distress call after a drone caught it near the engine room. That is not a symbolic target, and anyone telling you otherwise simply does not understand what that strait actually represents to the global economy. Roughly a fifth of the world's seaborne oil used to move routinely through that channel before this war started chewing through it, and every single time a tanker gets struck there, energy markets feel the shock within hours, not weeks, which is exactly why oil prices jumped again the moment this latest round of strikes was announced. Move another ring outward, and now you are standing inside the Gulf states themselves. And this, I think, is where the real story of the last several days actually lives, buried under the bigger headlines about Iran itself. Kuwait took a strike that started a fire at a power generation and desalination plant, the kind of facility that keeps drinking water flowing to an entire population, and Kuwaiti air defense crews were working through the night intercepting drones and missiles aimed squarely at that category of civilian infrastructure. Bahrain had a residential building damaged badly enough that its own interior ministry had to instruct residents to shelter in place immediately in their own homes in a country that is not even a party to this war in any formal sense. Jordan took hits near its airbases. And here is the part I think deserves more weight than it has gotten anywhere in the coverage. ABC's own satellite imagery analysis, not Iranian state media. ABC's own reporting confirmed real physical damage at bases in Jordan, Bahrain, and Qatar, along with a former UN camp and an industrial site inside Kuwait. So when Washington stands up at that podium and tells you the Iranian military has been demolished, somebody needs to explain to me seriously and specifically how a demolished military just managed to hit 3 ships in an international strait and put a fire into a Kuwaiti utility plant, all within the same 72-hour window. Now, here is the outer ring, the one almost nobody is talking about on any channel I have watched this week, and it is honestly the one that tells you the most about how Tehran is actually thinking right now this week. Qatar has not been struck, not once, in this entire latest wave, while 5 of its neighbors have absorbed direct fire in the same period. That is not luck, and I do not believe for 1 second that it is an accident either. Qatar has maintained a warmer relationship with Iran than any of its Gulf neighbors, and it has positioned itself as the chief broker trying to keep this ceasefire from collapsing entirely, shuttling messages back and forth between capitals that are not currently speaking to each other directly. Iran is not throwing darts at a map blindfolded here. It is that still has enough command and control, enough intelligence, and enough discipline in its chain of command to execute a nuanced political strategy through kinetic means. That is a capability most people watching this war from their living rooms are not being told still exists. So let's deal honestly with the story everyone keeps repeating to you every single night, because I think it is exactly backwards. And I have spent enough of my career around actual battlefield collapse to recognize what it looks like the moment I see it. The line you are hearing on almost every channel right now is that Iran is cornered, Iran is losing, and these strikes across the Gulf states are just the last desperate gasps of a regime that is running out of road entirely. I want to push back on that for a second, instead of just repeating it back the way it was handed to you by people who have never had to plan an actual campaign. Because in 30 some years of watching how militaries genuinely behave when they are truly losing, I have never once seen a losing side widen its own map. A losing side contracts. It pulls back to defend the capital. It protects what remains of its command structure and its most senior officers. It stops picking fights on 5 or 6 additional fronts simultaneously because it simply cannot afford that level of exposure while it is trying to survive. What you are watching Iran do right now is precisely the opposite of that pattern, and I think that distinction is the whole ball game. It expanded the battlefield deliberately into Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, Oman, and Syria, all within a single rotation, while very pointedly leaving Qatar completely untouched. That is not the behavior of a cornered animal thrashing in every direction at once out of desperation. That is the behavior of an actor that genuinely believes it retains more room to operate than Washington has been telling the American public it has. And here is the part that should actually worry you most, not the Gulf states first, you, the person watching this. The target CENTCOM keeps hitting inside Iran by its own repeat